knowing that ultimately I just have to kind of find my true north and follow it and be true to it whenever I'm lost, it's, in the fog, in the storm, you find the lighthouse and you just like, no, this is what I see and this is what it's about. And I can figure out how to get there. I feel like the audiences with Water for Elephants are much more, it's like they have these innocent eyes. I mean, that's how I feel. It's like feeling like we're performing for people who have never seen circus, even though I'm sure they have, but the framing is different enough that it's like, it makes them forget they have. So I really was also looking for sort of like characters that when you see them on stage, you get attached to them and they have their own color.
Welcome to the StageLink podcast. Today we're talking with Shana Carroll. Shana is the co-founding artistic director of the Montreal-based circus company, The Seven Fingers. Since its founding in 2002, Carroll has written, directed and choreographed 12 of their touring and or resident shows, 3 of which are currently running and which also include Sequence 8 at New York City Center and Trace's off-Broadway run at the Union Square Theatre. Carroll received a Drama Desk nomination for choreography and Best Theatrical Experience for their show Traces. Outside the Seven Fingers, Carroll directed Cirque du Soleil's first ever ice show Crystal, in addition to their performance at the Academy Awards in 2012. Also for Cirque du Soleil, Carroll was the circus choreographer and designer for their shows in Iris, Los Angeles, and Paramour on Broadway. And most recently, he's been working on Water for Elephants. Shana, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
Well, usually we start with your early career, but I want to start where you are now and your most recent work, which is Water for Elephants on Broadway.
Yeah.
So tell us about your journey on this project.
Yeah. It's based on the book Water for Elephants. And in 2019, in September of 2019, so it's coming up what would that be? 5-year anniversary. I received an email from the director, Jessica Stone. And she had, my name had been referred to her by the writer of the show who I'd crossed paths with on something else. So, and it was like a cold email, which, and it was a good thing I opened the email because she has sort of a funny email address. So I thought it was spam, but, so, good to open your emails. Anyway, so she reached out to see if I'd be interested in. And I don't think she necessarily knew at that point how she wanted to use circus and to what extent. And it was a bit of a journey in terms of our exchanges and her discovering this whole world. But yeah, so that was in 2019. And they sent me the script. And I was in Hong Kong, ironically, right afterwards when I was reading it and when I got all the ideas for the show.
There you go.
There, yeah. She sent me the script and I went to work in Hong Kong and I remember being there in my hotel reading through it, making little notes. And then, really soon after, early December of that same year, so 2 months later, we did workshops in Montreal and I just threw a bunch of stuff together based on the ideas I had and they all came up, producers and Jess, the director, and did a bit of show and tell, and then Jess and I did some jamming together of things that she was interested in seeing, and then I would try to translate that into, circus language. And then the pandemic hit, so that was 2020. Really, I always wonder how things would have developed if it had, like so many things in those years, we wonder how it would have developed otherwise. But what happened was obviously, the timeline got thwarted and yet because at that point I was pretty much the only collaborator really. there was obviously the composers and writers, but and I think they wanted to keep the ball going and, not lose momentum and just, said, okay, well, let's take advantage of this sort of window of time we have to continue workshops. So through, I guess that was 2 years, we would do these occasional workshops in Montreal, where we'd play with, even puppet imagery, different focuses and, through Zoom. I think Jess came up once or twice during that time, but, we were lucky that our studios in Montreal, Seven Finger Studios in Montreal, we had the space, the literal square footage so that during the pandemic, we could do things in a distanced, safe way. And we were given, permission to by, governmentally speaking, because they came and approved all of our setups and stuff. Whereas in New York, they were not yet at a point where they could workshop things. So I think that was fortunate as well. We had a huge TV with the Zoom, and Jess would look through the TV. And anyway, so that was for a few years. And then suddenly when green light started happening, it was like all planes took off at once. So suddenly I guess it was, summer 2022, we did a performance workshop in New York. And then the next year we were doing Atlanta, the next year doing Broadway, and all the pieces came together very quickly. And I have to say, and then the vibe of the project definitely shifted. We went from like pandemic, we're going to do some exploration. I always say like throw pasta on the wall and see what sticks. And then when really we were off to the races, it was, suddenly very intense speed and stakes and pressure. Which is normal. Yeah. So, and we performed in Atlanta last year we always do. Broadway shows tend to do what they call an out-of-town tryout, where they're in a regional theater and, create the show there and get to, to test out and make changes and learn things and have people come see it. And it was really a wonderful run there. Then it was a lot of fun. And then we came to Broadway. We opened in March and we're still running. So yeah.
Amazing. And how much, like in terms of the show, because I haven't seen it yet, I've watched the trailer, etc. How much circus is in it in terms of percentage, or how much does it play into the story?
Yeah, it plays a great deal into the story, and that was obviously, it was Jess's goal. I think particularly when she saw the kind of work we were doing and saw, I think it something sort of a light bulb went off when she realized how it can be used as a storytelling device. But I know for me, that's so much the heart of everything I do, and I didn't want to do a Broadway show if it was going to be just like to throw some tricks into things, or we're in a circus, so we're doing circus, so do the circus. For me it was really kind of devoted my life to believing that acrobatic language and circus language is a very rich and metaphorical and emotional and psychological language and a way of telling stories. And so I knew that if I was going to do it, I wanted to make sure there was going to be that aspect. What was great for me with Water for Elephants was it's a memory play, and the main character whose memory it is, who's telling the story, Mr. Jankowski, who's the protagonist, Jacob Jankowski, when he's in his 70s. And so he spent, this really pivotal formative years of his life in a circus. And so what I related to is having myself spent, now whatever 35 years of my life in circus. I feel like my imagination and my memory is also funneled through circus language. Like I am someone who will be having some like intense life experience, like, I don't know, in the hospital, and there's the big lamp above my head, and I imagine an aerialist dangling on it. Is an example I always give, but and so, there's this thing that when you live, when circus is your main vocabulary as an artist in your life, you start to see the world through, how it is in itself, sort of an acrobatic language. So I thought it was great, this great potential that Mr. Jankowski also similarly had his memory funneled through the language of circus. So that gave us the opportunity to kind of use circus language, kind of conflate it with the memory, and it not always having to be either like justified, quote unquote, because, like I said, because we're in a circus, or, there's a moment we're putting up the tent, so we're climbing the pole and things like that. But sometimes it's really used just in this merging of, he remembers the elephant, and the elephant comes out and, standing on someone else's shoulders and waving ears. And I've said this, I don't want to give too much away about the elephant. But yeah, so what's fun is we can weave it throughout. It really is like the fiber of the storytelling device. And then there's very specific moments, obviously, where there's sort of bigger numbers, and then others where it's like little salt and pepper throughout. It's a long show, as Broadway shows are. So, it's, I think, over 2.5 hours. So in the percent of how much circus there is on stage, compared to what we'd call a normal circus show, of course, there's not that much. There's probably, if I put it back to back, the first half, there's probably 20 minutes of circus. But because we do, 30 seconds of straps or 3 tricks on a pole, the intensity for the performer, you're still warming up the same amount. You're still takes the same amount of expertise to do it, even if it's shorter. So it's like you get these very like clip condensed versions of the content. So if I counted the disciplines, it's like a full circus show and more. It's just quite often just used really, really sparingly. And that's also just to give us a chance for it not to be repetitive and to be able to have more vocabulary words. They do a lot of different things. So we have 7 circus artists on stage who do so many different types of disciplines. It's in fact very hard to cast because, it's the hoops artist needs to be the hand-to-hand flyer and the bonking flyer, and then he needs to do the ladder, and he also needs to port bonking, and then he needs to juggle knives, and then this person has to do wheel, and then there's the straps, and so there's a lot of. First of all, it's a puzzle, and also everyone just needs to be really multi-talented. So I think it's
a troupe of generalists that can do all the things.
Exactly, and be great dancers and singers and performers and actors. But I think, talking to the acrobats, it feels like a full show. I mean, also they're involved in everything. That's the other. It's not like they go off stage when they're not doing circus because they're involved in all the choreography. They're ensemble members. But it is even circus content wise. I remember that was one of my fears. And artistically, I didn't want to oversaturate with circus, not only because that's not the point, it's a musical. And also circus does have a way that if you don't use it sparingly, it does derail you. Like if your brain goes too far into like, oh my God, they're doing this incredible thing on a pole, then you're going to stop caring about the main characters in the story. And we don't want to be derailing in the middle of this show. We want to be pulled along one train. So I knew I wanted to use it really sparingly. Also just for its impact, so that the audience itself doesn't get oversaturated and numbed by, okay, now I've seen, 5,000 things that scare me. Nothing scares me anymore. Scares is the wrong word. I should say surprise. And,
yeah.
But I was worried because I wanted to have, that quality and that level and that expertise. And so, wonderful performers. And if it was so sparing that they were doing, just a few minutes here and there, how was I going to get really good people to do it if they were barely doing anything? So in the end, it's not that. In the end, I think they do feel like it's a very complete performing experience combined with the other aspects. And actually, like I said, acrobatically, it does kind of add up to quite a lot. And I think it's really rewarding, but I love the amount we have, honestly. I think it's enough to definitely feel like it's not like any other Broadway show for sure. And really you feel like, just yesterday I was listening to people in the audience say to their children, like, oh my God, it's like being at the circus. I mean, really, you do have that sense to what circus can do, even in its traditional form of just being so exhilarating and getting your pulse and your adrenaline and all of that. And it's able to do that and not just be imagery. And yet it's always serving the story, and it never bulldozes or derails. It's always just like feeding into the experience. And parallel, part of the job for me was not only finding, like I said, literal storytelling in the sense, okay, we're setting up a tent, we have sledgehammers, can we juggle them, and ways that that circus is sort of necessary in the utilitarian sense or the functional sense, but also always finding that parallel metaphor to the moment. So we're actually giving the same information to the audience just through a different channel. So instead of having something intellectually making sense to them with words, you're having something coming through their gut where they're like getting it on some visceral level, even if they can't put it into words. So one thing I say a lot is how, when you're showing great emotional stakes or dramatic stakes, using physical stakes to show that, because then we're being put in the same like physiological state watching, a 3 high as the characters who are just being thrown from a train. So like always making sure that the emotional energy of the circus is matching what the emotional energy of the characters and the storytelling is at the moment. And then, we have a whole dream sequence. So that's really a great chance to just, really go full on metaphor with, because we're in the world of the subconscious there, which already being a memory play, we're in the world of subconscious. So we can allow ourselves to be metaphorical throughout, but then really in the dream sequence, we have like him reimagining his parents' car crash, but we're doing it, kind of acrobatic dance wise, or, seeing the horse gallop in place and spinning madly. And it's kind of representing the sort of the freedom and the, beauty that, and his love for the animal. Anyway, lots of details of the story there, but fun. It was all to say it was really fun to be able to use its metaphorical impact, and which is something I'm so passionate about, and emotional impact. In addition to being able to just, also sometimes just do a great production number and throw tricks into things.
No, amazing. And it's interesting because, like, I think that I don't know how you approached it, or if you did, that Broadway audiences kind of have an expectation of what a Broadway show is, and I wonder if there's any reflections from your work on this one, and then also Paramour, which was also a hybrid show, I guess, from on a
Mhm.
Broadway sense with circus in it. And I think
Yeah.
putting that genre in is a tough ask. I think just because it fits outside the normal construct of what people expect a Broadway show to be. And because you've done this twice now, can you
Yeah.
reflect on any learnings on either one, or how you feel maybe that audiences have evolved or not, or what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting because in Broadway, there's audiences, which are, the audiences are sometimes they're tourists, and then there's the theater community, which is a huge part of your audience on Broadway, because of a lot of when you open the show, a lot of the people you're trying to please are the critics and your fellow Broadway people, and then of course there's also the audiences. So I feel like there's these two parallel. I mean, even if I think about the reaction to circus, there's they've evolved, both things have evolved, but differently in a way. But nor I'd say the quote unquote normal audiences. What I find really interesting is actually the circus has a huge impact. I mean, we often talk about amongst the acrobatic cast how we feel like it's more reaction, quote unquote, than in a normal circus show because of the lens, because they're there not expecting. They're not like, I'm going to see Cirque du Soleil and let me see. It's going to be flying trapeze now, and then the contortionist. And even if they sort of know there's going to be circus, they're not, their brain isn't there. And I think the fact that it actually is, I mean, it's a very rich story, and they're so attached to the characters. So in a way that when something happens, it's more of of a performative thing, more of an element of prowess. I think they just get so unexpectedly moved and kind of jolted. So we actually find that, like, it uh, it's really a great reaction. It's a really fun place to do circus in that sense. Someone starts spinning on a hoop and everyone's screaming, So there's that. I mean, I found that less in Paramour because of the thing of, it was advertised as a Cirque du Soleil Broadway show. So a lot of our audiences, first of all, came because it was Cirque du Soleil, and it was that branding that brought them there. And we were expecting to see, I think, what it was. It was, a little more story than a normal Cirque du Soleil show, but also a series of acts. Um, so yeah, I feel like the audiences with Water for Elephants are much more, it's like they have these innocent eyes. I mean, that's how I feel. It's like feeling like we're performing for people who have never seen circus, even though I'm sure they have, but the framing is different enough that it's like, it makes them forget they have. And it's really, that's a lot of fun. And in terms of the actual theater community, I actually think there's something moving. Broadway's moving slightly more right now towards appreciating visual storytelling. Around the time I did Paramour, and of course, Paramour had its own challenges, so I don't really want to get too deep into it. But I remember really feeling like, the church of the word and storytelling was so strong, and that it was, whether it was, like I said, critics or the theater community, that there wasn't a lot of sort of appreciation for, or understanding even that, like, actually, telling a story visually or physically or, metaphorically, was a valid storytelling device. I felt often there was a bit of a dismissive feeling of, it was sort of almost like a cheap, device, putting acrobatics in something. There's still a little bit of that, I think, of, I mean, even the fact we use the word tricks, it's like a little bit of the perspective that it's like, oh, we're putting tricks into, like it's a trick. It's, but I feel more so, that there's a bit of a wave more. I mean, it's funny. The show Illinois is performing on Broadway. and it made a huge impact, got a great review and got nominated for a Tony and all of that. And it's a dance show. I mean, it's really, it's a dance show with a storyline, and beautiful. But, those of us who've seen dance shows, it's a dance show with a storyline, but I think done on Broadway and having theater people see it and kind of understand that that's possible to tell a story through physical language is right now very stimulating for them. And I felt like there was a bit of that with Waterfall Efforts too, where people were sort of discovering that, the validity of telling a story physically, compared to before, where I felt it was a little bit more closed-minded in that sense. So it might just be a testament to the quality of the different works, and that this is a more successful way of doing it. I mean, I do feel like I need to mention Pippin, which Gypsy, my co-finger, worked on over 10 years ago, which also had a lot of circus in it. And I think the difference with Pippin was it was really, the conceit was that the ensemble were the players. They were a troupe, a circus troupe. So it was great because it was all like second degree kind of, like in that vaudeville way of everything's just a show. But it was always sort of in the context of them kind of like being performers. So, the circus was used also metaphorically and, what it meant in different moments. But, it rarely left that conceit of them being actual circus performers. So I think that's maybe why it was not as, that's maybe why the two aren't compared now. Because there was less of sort of the, like, putting in the context of everyday life or of a memory, or just in a framing that is more of an unexpected framing.
And now, a note from our sponsor. The StageLink podcast is proud to be sponsored by Clearcom. Clearcom is the leader in voice communications for theater and the performing arts. Call your cues with the simplicity and elegance of Clearcom Intercom solutions. You can find them at CLEARCOM.com. Go check them out.
Yeah. I think it's also too, Water for Elephants leans itself to this because it is literally about circus, right? So you're not shoehorning circus disciplines into a narrative that wasn't necessarily meant for those things. I think that's a harder reach than a show that, and people have seen the movie and know that story a little bit as well, or they may have read the book. So.
My first goal when the project came to me, I said, okay, this is what we're gonna use circus, but except when we're in the circus. Like, I really wanted to be that circus was the language, like that, like we're demonstrating the circusness of it by doing it everywhere else, like using it like a circus.
Except in the circus. I like that.
And then we have one, finally, it was called the Grand Spec, where we're in the circus. And then it was like, okay, well, no, we're not going to not do circus there because that's just too much fun, like to actually have the moment we're in a circus. But I thought that would be, I mean, which it is. It's sort of the interesting way of showing the essence of circus without it being just every time we're on stage is when we see it. So yeah, just character-wise, it's realistic. I mean, as we know as circus people, when you're effing around, like we were joking yesterday about, if you get circus people to a swimming pool and all they're doing is like bonkings and, or when they're drunk at a party and trying to show off and do somersaults, and it's dangerous. But there is that energy. And so there's a realistic aspect in some of the acts where it's backstage and it's kind of a party and they're one-upping each other doing tricks. That's actually something we would do. So,
totally.
So having the characters be circus artists or circus people, whether they're artists or not, makes it always kind of justifiable as well, because they literally would do that.
Yeah,
they'd do back handsprings in the middle.
I mean, yeah, I mean, why walk across a room when you can cartwheel? Really. I was going to ask you, since you mentioned reading the script in Hong Kong here and looking at it, it must be a very different process than, say, writing a circus show that doesn't have a script. So for you, what's that process for you creatively that is different than a traditional circus evolution from Seven Fingers?
It's really fun. I mean, I've done shows whether it's a script or whether there's source material or something that you really just have to like look at it and go like, okay, how can I interpret this? How can I draw something out of it? The last show I did at the university, so it wasn't, but I directed a show at Concordia University that was based on a poem, and you're looking through the wording and, okay, what does this bring? So it's a type of work I like doing. It feels more like you're a student and you're like taking a text and analyzing it and getting images. So it's fun. I mean, Seven Finger shows I start with a blank page, and that's a different type of fun, but it's scary. As we all know, blank pages are scary. So I don't know. I mean, I think when I'm starting a project that has a source material, it's obviously it's an easier on ramp, and you have all these, like, oh my gosh, okay, there's a I'll just give the whole example again, but like, okay, there's a scene where they're putting up 10. Okay, what can we use? Okay, oh yeah, there's ropes, there's calling. And then instantly you could just go boom, 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 and kind of associate off of it. The blank page is more like, I go on walks, I do tissues, I garden, I have one flash, I write it down, and it's, you sort of feel like you're just kind of, it's like witchcraft. You have to like just reach for like images. And also it's so much more because I'm the genesis of it. I have to think of like, what are my convictions right now in this moment that I want to tap into, my life stories that I should be telling, my own ideas. Oh yeah, that's true. 10 years ago, I had an idea about using a rubber gloves. I mean, I'm just sorry, but you know what I mean? It's like you're really doing a lot of like sort of excavation all the time in your own brain and imagination. And so that start I find so much more daunting and blue sky. And then when you put the pieces together, then it feels magical. Because whereas starting a show with source material, it's super fun in the beginning because you have the on ramp, but then at some moment it's pretty restrictive, because then it's like really this one thing, and you might have some great idea, but it's like, no, that's not good for the story. And in this case, I mean, I'm not even the director, so it's sort of like I have to sell it and I have to take her vision. And, and she says, oh, I have this vision for this moment. And sometimes I go, ooh, whether it's that I see it or I don't see it, when it doesn't come from my own imagination, it's one thing to go like, okay, I see this thing and I kind of know how to get us there. And you just use your compass and you instantly get a sense of like, that's it. That's not it. That's like bushwhacking. And then when it's not your vision, you're like, okay, I'm going to try. Is this it? Is this it? And like kind of needing that confidence. It doesn't come from your own head. So that's hard too. So I'd say it starts out easier, but is harder in the later stages. Whereas with my own shows, the blue sky thing is hard, but then when it starts coming together, it is the most satisfying. It's like putting a puzzle together on a table, and then suddenly you step back, you're like, oh my God, it's created a ocean landscape or something, and that thing of having my own compass. And also, no matter what, it's always satisfying. You're expressing your own ideas and stories and imagination, because that's why we become artists in a way, is to try to express what's deep inside us. But knowing that ultimately I just have to kind of find my true north and follow it and be true to it, whenever I'm lost, it's, in the fog, in the storm, you find the lighthouse and you just like, like, no, this is what I see and this is what it's about. And I can figure out how to get there. And in a process like this, sometimes, I mean, the story is that, but yeah, it's less listening to your own instinct and more like, okay, I have to go back to the script and see if there's anything in here that will continue to feed me. Actually, sometimes it's fun too, because it pushes you in places you wouldn't go, which is a good thing too. Good thing just as a human and as a creator to say like, okay, actually I wouldn't have done it this way, but now I've exercised a muscle or learned something I wouldn't have otherwise. And good for the results often to have that third idea that I would have done this, but Jess wanted this, but tried to incorporate her idea, but do what I kind of originally imagined. And then we get sort of that third thing that's even better. And the dream actually was a really interesting example, because I'd created there was no song for it. And because it was just written as this dream sequence. And I was always imagining it would be sort of scored like a film, not really actually with lyrics and song, but just sort of more like, or like, like Cirque, sort of more scored like an act. And I created this long piece and I kept saying, we have to talk about music, we have to talk about music. And I was giving all my suggestions, and then they wrote a song that was like, okay, this is not the right song for the dream. Like, I don't understand. There's no motor.
What's going on?
A ballad. Like, I don't know how we're going to do this, like freaky fights, whatever. And not only they kept like orchestrated, in fact, the juxtaposition of the two that wouldn't have gone together made it so magical. And the fact there were words and the character was saying something beautiful. I mean, it just really took it to a level that I wouldn't have taken it. And on top of it, because the lyrics they wrote was, the chorus is, what do you do when the people that you love are torn from you? It then influenced the imagery I worked with. And there was a whole part, like the last chapter of the dream, where they're walking on a tight wire and keep falling away, and doing a 1 foot in the air and then falling away. So suddenly, because they gave me that lyric, I was like, ooh, like that's like meat I can work with, and then created the whole end of that piece based on just that one image of what do you do when the people that you love are torn from you. And so that's great, because that was not something I think I would have done in my blank page blue sky way. So yeah.
That's really fascinating. I really find that interesting. I also wanted to ask you, though, because I feel maybe I'm wrong, the timeline for putting on a Broadway show from rehearsal to opening is quite short. And generally with circus, if you're training an act or you're learning something, that's going to be a longer period of time. So how does those two sort of things overlap when you're putting it together?
It was challenging. There's two things. One is the creative process, which I think because in circus, because we do have training, it also means that by extension, we had to have a longer creative period, because it's like, we know, even when I was a Cirque, they need 6 months to train a trampoline act, whatever. So then we can take our time, as like creating the show and creating the acts and doing different versions and brainstorming. And it's just a different pace, because we have to go at an acrobatic pace. Creatively, we can go at that pace as well. And there's also a little bit of, American theater, which is, commercial, and every time is money, et cetera, compared to, when you have grant money, and when you're, there's a very different beat in Europe and in Canada. So that the creatively, you're like, the fact you're working at warp speed all the time, it's hard when that's not what you're used to. When you're used to, like, in fact, part of the definition of creativity is leaving yourself space. Like I was saying, like I go on walks. Like I was writing a show 2 years ago in Montreal called Moire, and like basically it was like, we were joking, it was like the dog walk was where like my composer, I wrote lyrics to a song while I was walking the dog, and every time we didn't know what to do, like, okay, go walk your dog. Yeah.
I'll get the next round of ideas when I go with my dog.
I mean, imagine if I said to my bosses here, like, I just gotta go walk. I'll be right back. It's like everything is an aquarium. Like everyone's always watching you work at all times. You have 10 minutes of stage time, and they're like making sure you're using it well. And because I understand it's like there is really a finite amount of time and money, et cetera, et cetera. So there's that clock is always ticking. That pressure cookers are always on. So creatively, that's a challenge. I mean, as usual, I mean, it's both. I mean, sometimes pressure is great, and it makes you, whatever the deadline aspect. We need deadlines sometimes. Otherwise, I mean, a number of people I know who, it's 10 years they said they want to write a book, but they don't. It's like when you have a deadline, you force yourself to do stuff. So, so that's not always a bad thing, but it's definitely for people who've worked like myself, in circus environments where we do have time, usually because acrobatics need time. It's a bit jarring, and you have to find a different gear. Like for me, I had to find different gear. And then in terms of the acrobatic side of it, that was really challenging, because of if we had come in and said, okay, we are going to incorporate, we have a hand-to-hand duo who've been working together for 10 years, and they have their act, and we're going to do it in the show. And we have this straps act, and then we have to incorporate it. And already that's work. And we have to find warm-up time and training time for them. But in fact, what we wanted to do is obviously, create something that was unique to our show, not only to make it original, but also so that it was true to the storytelling. Because it's hard to shoehorn an existing act into something when you want it to tell the story you want it to tell. So we're creating all new material. And that usually, like it's here, whenever it's like months and months and months of training in order to create, to train duos that have never worked together, someone who'd never done this type of discipline before, a banquine group that's never worked together. So that, I mean, ideally I would have wanted a month of training, which was, I think I got maybe a week of half days before we actually started, rehearsals. And then you're just carving a day of like, can I have a half hour in the morning? Can I, and there was obviously the learning curve with the team here as well. And that now they know what training actually is and what warm up actually is. But on top of it, in the beginning, it was really hard to express, why we needed to train and what we were doing during training. And that made it, more stressful as well, because, as I said, everyone wants you to be using your time well. And it's different when you're training circus. You also can't be doing it at like warp speed. You have to go like, okay, let's
Take your time or you're going to get injured.
let's, get the adrenaline out, get the cortisol levels down. We got to like calmly do this. And that's hard when you're in a beat that's really rushed. So that was definitely challenging. And we had a great team, especially particularly at the stage manager I'm working with on Water for Elephants happened to be also the stage manager on Paramour, totally a Broadway person, but he, having done at least that experience in Paramour, was and the stage manager, kind of control, what do I mean?
Manages the schedule, really.
I was going to say
right.
rules the room, and rules isn't the right word, but, leads the room in a way. And so the fact that he knew intrinsically, he was like, no, like he knew what training was and what warm up was and what, what's hard now is like dancers need to warm up too, but it's on their own time. But it's like, yeah, but we circus people can't you can't warm up bunking on your own time. You need 3 other people and, 15, 16 feet of ceiling, more than that. Sorry. 20 feet. So it's, there's no coming and being ready to get on stage and do it. Like no matter what, you need that warm up time. And that was a hard, and also the realities of unions and,
sure,
cost. So yeah, so that was very challenging. And I mean, I wouldn't say it wasn't without our like growing pains of, injuries that maybe could have been avoided. I mean, nothing major, but because it's like we're trying to adapt how we do things. I also say on the other side of it, I learned that like, maybe we don't need 2 hours of warm up all the time and we can be more efficient. And actually there's certain things that someone can learn quicker than you might have realized. And then you find out after, however, actually that thing was not something we could do quickly and let's not do it because in fact, we trained it too quickly. And, there's certain ideas we'd have to throw away quickly because we're in a 7-finger show. We'll have some crazy idea for a trick and we could train it for a month and even little by little go, okay, so it's going to work. Cause you know how it is with acrobatics. Sometimes you get an idea and you discover after a week of training it that actually it's not possible. Like, oh, that was cool. I think this is, or it's going to be dangerous or whatever. And there were things where it's like, if we spent 15 minutes on something and got the idea that like, we weren't sure it was going to be possible. It's like, okay, sorry, garbage. Like we can't afford to spend time on something and discover too late that, so yeah, a lot of that.
No, that's so interesting. And when it came to casting those roles, you said they're also part of the ensemble and they've got to dance. And do they have to sing as well? And who was it? You and the director that made those choices on who to bring in? How did that casting process go? Given that it's such a diverse need.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, for the circus, so I have 7 acrobats on stage and then 2 swings, so they're 9 total. And so it was me casting it by myself, and yet I would tell the director and the producers like, I'm going to cast this person and that person, and they'd say, okay, that sounds great, and now they have a little bit of not only understanding circus, understanding the needs of the show, and can weigh in when they ask questions about someone I'm planning on casting, and but also I think they were very cognizant of the fact they didn't really know so much the specifics of it, so trusted me in my judgment and knowing the pool of people I worked with. And then in the profiles, and there's a few things. One is I really want to make sure for them, I knew I had people that could dance fairly well, that the singing was a plus. Obviously, I wasn't going to get that many acrobats who could sing, but for instance, Bella is in the acrobatic cast and was actually a dancer before, and they actually just sing really well. They were in our show, Dear San Francisco, and I knew they could sing. So I was like, I really thought, okay, that'll be a good fit. And the combination of skills and all of that. But also, I really wanted to have people that I thought were themselves characters that fit the show. So, circus people can be really good actors. I don't mean to like generalize, but I think quite often what they're good at is like taking their essence and magnifying it, partly because that's what we're sort of taught to do when you have your own solo act, is sort of like, what's your essence and what's your thing that makes you different, and kind of, learning how to like put charisma and presence and everything in that energy or your way of moving. So along those lines, I wanted like their natural energy to like almost be characters, characters that would have been written in this particular circus. And, like we have the Rouse who are kind of gritty and workers and rough. And, I knew if I had all like graceful contortionists, we wouldn't be able to achieve that. Not
Yeah.
not only would that not fit with the skill sets, but, so I really was also looking for sort of like characters that when you see them on stage, you get attached to them and they have their own color. And I think that it's actually something I feel really that we've achieved, that I think the 7 people on that stage are just so, first of all, just, visually really captivating and very different among them and sort of really capture the type of circus performer and character that would have been in that circus in the 30s. So that was a big part of the consideration.
I love that. I love that. Oh, that's so interesting, Shana. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Now, we always finish our podcast with the same 2 questions, so I'm going to ask you these now.
Sure. Okay.
What is your most favorite thing about your job or the industry?
Oh, well, I like the element of play. I think when I love my job most is when we're, if I think about myself, like at my studios with a group of really great, creative, fun artists, and we're, like I was saying, I get an idea for a trick and trying something, and then it doesn't work, and we're all dying laughing. And and it's like there's a few great quotes about like I think John Cleese said, "True creativity is indistinguishable from play." And there's another thing, some scientific study about the speed that when new synapses in the brain are formed, how it's like 5 times more quickly if it's done in a context of play. And this is all stuff I've sort of like discovered more recently. But I mean, all my life I've known that when I do good work, it's when I'm like having fun, when I'm in a mode of play, when really it's like when I was a kid and I would be like at a sleepover, go like, let's make up a dance, when it was just fun. So I like that feeling. I like that feeling of like when I was a kid and I wanted to make shows because it was fun and I wanted to do, we were in 6th grade and we were like, let's do Grease, the musical, like ourselves. And, just cause
I love it.
and so that's when I really enjoy it the most. I mean, I'd also say, obviously I think when I'm working on it, on, like I said, my 7 Fingers shows where there's the similar to the play, but a little more on the kind of deep and therapeutic level. We do a lot of like improv and just deep work through whether it's dance improv or acting improv, where a lot just a lot gets said and exchanged, and it's very healing. I think that's the word. So play and healing. I think there's a lot of healing work that happens in the room, and then I think there's a lot of healing work that happens obviously for the audience and for the like in the moment of the performance. But those are the things I love the most, the play and the healing. And sometimes it's the antithesis of those 2 things. And that's when I love it least.
All in a balance.
Yeah.
And if there's one thing that you could change about your job or the industry, what would that be?
I mean, I don't know. There's a lot of, it's like the Goldilocks thing of like, just, like when it goes too far to one extreme or too far to the other extreme, you kind of want the balance. I was thinking about how, circus is very lawless. And sometimes I'm working with, like when I'm working with all circus people, I feel like, oh my God, like we need to teach these kids, how to, sit up and listen, or, they don't have the same training as, when, in theater school or in dance school where they, they're sort of taught to be, soldiers in the way of like, good soldiers, like, listen directions and show up on time and all that stuff. And so sometimes the lawlessness of circus can be tiring when you're directing circus people. On the flip side, when it goes too militaristic, for lack of a better word, I think that's what gives circus its creativity and its energy and its playfulness. And the fact it's always renewing itself is we're not following rules and we're not trying to fit into molds, and everyone has agency and has humanity and can speak up and share their opinions and share their ideas. So I love that. That lawlessness is something that I most appreciate about circus, and yet can be the most frustrating. And so I think if anything, what I would wish is there's just sort of a little more of like finding the good middle ground of how much we can. It's like between God, and I think in Dungeons and Dragons they have the character descriptions, or like there's chaotic good, and like there's a spectrum of bad, good, neutral, lawful good,
Lawful.
lawful good, chaotic good, lawful bad. Anyway, so the balance between chaotic and lawful, like, I feel like that's what I would love to find in circus, because you sort of need to be able to have both of those muscles. And I feel like just the chaotic is incredibly, like kind of, yeah, it like is inspiring and regenerating and creative and da, 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 da. And then just, sometimes you can't do one thing. Like the number of times I've had to tell performers, like on shows, like, like you're on a boat and you're all rowing in the same direction because it's the only way to get anywhere. So even if you're going to the wrong place, there's no right or wrong, first of all, but like you have to get somewhere. So let's choose an island to row to and we all row there. But when you have
we go
opinions and everyone's rowing their paddles in different directions, you're going to go nowhere at all. So there's times I just wish it was a little more, let's all row in the same direction. And then on the flip side, like I said, when it's too organized, and then it's like, okay, all we're going to do are the same ideas over and over again, because that's the only thing you can do if you're not allowed to like be sparked in the moment and have people, bring their own humanity to it. You're just going to get closed into this sort of sterile box, and then you can't evolve that way. So I think that would be the thing. It's a subtle thing, but it's like that balance of chaotic and lawful.
I really identify with that. And I think one of the people that taught me that lesson the most was Franco Dragone when I worked with him, because I was such a structured person and wanted everything to go in the box. Yeah. And he would run down a rabbit hole and I'd pull him back and we'd run down a rabbit hole. And what I learned during that period was sometimes you got to go down that rabbit hole to find that beautiful image or to find that beautiful moment. And that's what makes it special, And so I totally identify with, I love that answer, because I totally identify that a great show has that good yin and yang between the two, chaos and control, right? Yeah. And if you do that, you get a great show.
Yeah, I think so too. And especially if you do the thing of the true north, like that's why I find that the sort of chaotic feeling, when it feels genuinely chaotic, is it's like, okay, where are we even going? When it feels kind of chaotic, when it is like ideas bouncing off the walls, but ultimately, but we're going there. And
it lands somewhere.
Yeah, we're going to go through these weeds, like I was saying, like the bushwhacking, and we're going to pick the pasta off the walls, the pieces that we like, and we're going to, and then it suddenly becomes organized. For me, that's what I adore. And actually, Debbie Brown was really good at that. Debbie Brown sounds so flighty. I mean, she was kind of like my mentor. She seemed so flighty, and we were all over the place. We're improvising. That's great. And then suddenly she'd come in and she's like, doing this, not doing that, da, 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 and like the puzzle would come together. And you're like, oh my God, like, first of all, you didn't really, it didn't feel like you knew where we were going, but you apparently did.
I love that.
Good on that. And it was just sort of miraculous. So I was like, oh, the entire time she was, and that's how I feel as well. Like, I feel like the entire time I'm trying to figure out how the puzzle pieces are going to interlock, even if it feels very free form. And then when the moment comes, when it's like, okay, we're going to do 2 seconds of this, take this, da, 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 move that. And then that's in some ways the not fun part, because it's just subtraction, which is never fun when you're creative, because it's like a grieving process. You're like, oh, but this beautiful moment and that idea and this improv and that. Take that away. But at the same time, it's kind of like, oh, wow. And now we have something concrete, and, we've knit a sweater instead of just having lots of yarn all over the room. So that's fun.
I love that. Yeah. Shana, thank you so much for getting up early after having a late night. I truly appreciate it. Thank you for joining us on the podcast.
So thank you so much. And take care. Good luck with everything.